Witch hunts were a way to punish and kill women pretty easily way back when, and today we're doing a deep dive. The first and last hunts, trials and punishment, and more are all on the docket for your enjoyment. Early witches were people who practiced witchcraft, using magic spells and calling upon spirits for help or to bring about change. Most witches were thought to be pagans doing the devil's work. Many, however, were simply natural healers or so-called wise women whose choice of profession was just misunderstood. It's unclear exactly when witches came on the historical scene, but one of the earliest records of a witch is in the Bible, in the book of Samuel I, thought to be written between 931 BC and 721. It tells the story of when King Saul sought the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's spirit to help him defeat the Philistine army. The witch roused Samuel, who then prophesied the death of Saul and his sons. The next day, according to the Bible, Saul's son died in battle, and Saul ended his life. Other Old Testament verses condemn witches, such as the oft-cited Exodus 22:18, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Additional biblical passages caution against divination, chanting, or using witches to contact the dead. In 1428, the first systematic European witch hunt began in Switzerland. This witch hunt lasted 8 years and resulted in the deaths of 367 people. To be condemned, a person had to have at least 3 neighbors publicly state that they were a witch. The majority of those accused in these witch trials were peasants. These individuals were subjected to all sorts of torment, under which confessions were extracted concerning meetings with the devil, who had supposedly urged the accused to avoid mass and confession in exchange for the ability to fly. Others confessed to having the power to kill their neighbors or to change into werewolves. The condemned were mostly burned to death, with a couple having their heads removed first. Victims were tied to a ladder that was pushed into the fire. As a final mercy, the authorities tied bags of explosives around the witches' necks just to quicken the deaths. Possibly the most famous victim of burning at the stake for witchcraft was none other than Joan of Arc. However, Joan was not killed during the witch hunting crazy period. Rather, she was a victim of politics. Witchcraft was just a convenient way to get rid of her. Joan had been subjected by her English captors to 15 examinations, both public and private, before being subjected to a trial in a court, who found her guilty of blasphemy. A translation of her trial record stated that the poison had had a transformative effect, turning her into a member of Satan. It was determined that Joan was a blasphemer against God, and thus she was burnt at the stake in 1431, where it is said she died of smoke inhalation before the flames finally consumed her. One of the biggest European witch hunts took place in Bamberg, Germany from 1626 to 1631. Of the 1,000 people convicted, 900 were burnt at the stake, some of whom were fortunate enough to have lost their heads first. This was one witch hunt that did not discriminate. People of all ages and classes were killed during these witch trials. It all began in 1626, like I mentioned, when people petitioned the local authority, asking why witches and wizards had sent frost to destroy their crops. The Prince Bishop, Johann Georg Fuchs von Dornheim, launched an investigation, and before long, one woman was arrested and confessed to causing the frost. So how do you identify a lady witch? Well, there were several ways that you could do this, according to the witch hunters of the era. One such sign that a person was a witch was any mark on the skin, such as a mole, an age spot, even a little birthmark. These were seen as a mark of the devil, and one which the witch used to suckle her familiar, which would be a demon that would help them in their evil doing, perhaps disguised as a domestic pet, a cat, a dog. Given that a lot of people have some sort of blemish on their skin, witch hunters were assured of unearthing a witch by using this method. Another common way was to prick them with pins. If the skin didn't break, you didn't have anything poking through, then it was a sure sign they were under the devil's control. So witch hunters used a retractable pin, so once again, you had no hope of passing this test. Early on in specifically European witch hunts, women who were single or elderly were very vulnerable to suspicion. Historians attribute this to patriarchal attitudes. Single women and widows lacked any kind of male protection. Similarly, a woman with a bad temper or a loose mouth was deemed highly suspicious, or if you had any kind of healing power using herbal medicine, bingo, you're a target. So why did they start in the first place? Well, there's quite a few theories as to why the European witch hunting craze happened, such as Catholicism and Protestants vying for dominance, and the Little Ice Age that caused widespread loss of crops and livestock that resulted in sickness and starvation. These witch hunts were further fueled by greedy and really evil and unethical witch hunters, who stood to make considerable financial gains from finding and killing so-called witches in large numbers. European witch hunts were good examples of icky delocalized power, used for bad instead of good. There were a lot of incidents of witch trials in Europe that happened under the jurisdiction of village authorities, where justice was just sort of handed out by local judges and priests. Germany, France, Switzerland, Belgium, and the Netherlands saw the greatest number of prosecutions for witchcraft. The Catholic countries of Italy, Spain, and Portugal had fewer prosecutions. The height of the German witch frenzy was marked by the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, a book that became the handbook for witch hunters and inquisitors. Written in 1486 by Dominicans Henricius Instructorus and Jacobus Brenge, and first published in Germany in 1487, the main purpose of this was to systematically refute arguments claiming that witchcraft did not exist. The last official witch trial may have taken place in Poland in 1775, even though there are some conflicting records around this. It allegedly began after members of the community asked officials in a neighboring village to investigate evidence of sorcery. 14 women were arrested after being accused of using magic to harm the wife of a local nobleman. 3 of these women died after being tormented, with the remaining folks being burned at the stake. This witch trial is credited by historians as being the beginning of the Polish government's 1776 ban on torment and witch trials. Why did they end? Well, various political factors which historians have identified as contributing to the end of the European witch hunting craze. There are various political factors which historians have identified as contributing to the European witch hunting craze, such as the 30 Years' War, and when these eventually came to an end, they ended a period of political instability. Intellectual factors also helped bring the European witch hunts to an end, with the Enlightenment encouraging people to take a more rational approach to the concept of witchcraft and to reject superstition. Advances in science meant that moles and birthmarks could be explained as a normal part of human physiology. Thankfully, many European countries began to issue laws that abolished the hunting of witches. Essentially, when there was stable government and economic security, paranoia surrounding witchcraft declined. But as witch hysteria decreased in Europe, it grew in the New World, which was reeling from the wars between the French and British, all the chaos around smallpox, and the ongoing fear of attacks from, well, everybody. The tense atmosphere was ripe for finding scapegoats. Probably the best known witch trials took place in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. These trials began when Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams began suffering from fits, body contortions, uncontrolled screaming. As more and more young women began to exhibit symptoms, mass hysteria ensued, and 3 women were accused of witchcraft: Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, an enslaved woman owned by Parris's father. She confessed to being a witch, and she began accusing others of using black magic. On June 10th, Bridget Bishop became the first accused witch to be put to death during the Salem witch trials when she went the way of the rope necklace at the gallows. Ultimately, around 150 people were accused and 18 were put to death. Massachusetts wasn't the first of the 13 colonies to obsess about witches, though. In terms of witch hunts in the United States, witchcraft was one of the 12 capital crimes decreed by Connecticut's colonial government back in 1642. It was in Hartford, 30 years before the infamous Salem witch trials, that a witch hunt hysteria took hold, resulting in 7 trials and 4 lives ended. In Windsor, Connecticut, in 1647, Elsie Young was the first person in America who lost their lives for witchcraft. Before Connecticut's final witch trial took place in 1697, 46 people were accused of witchcraft in that state, and 11 were put to death to the crime. The legal precedent cited by devoutly Puritan colonists was of a divinely higher order. Biblical passages, such as Exodus 22:18 and also Leviticus 20:27, came into play.